Barento, Razleplasm, Mohammad, thank you for making the time and coming on, generally speaking.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So first off, Razleplasm?
Razleplasm, actually.
Razleplasm, sorry.
Yeah. It's Raz these days. I mean, like I've changed it to Raz and shortened it since becoming a caster, actually. When I first became a caster, I realized, oh no, people actually have to say my name. It's like, make it easier for them. And also like not as wild.
Okay, I like it. So in my research, I told you I was searching for a lot of things. Are there any things in which that you were hoping that I didn't find?
Oh God. Interviews before I became a commentator. Just simply because that was when I realized I had a lot of run-on sentences. I was kind of scatterbrained because there were so many things that I wanted to attack. And I was like, oh my God, I'm just not articulate. It's just, that's what I just wanted to just stamp out if those existed.
I wish that I could find the VODs of you casting for your friends' games that like no one watched at all. I'd be very curious of those. Do you still have recordings of those?
Oh my God, they exist on YouTube.
Okay, good.
And
good.
it's not even like casting of like friends. It's LPL expansion tournament when they first started doing the LPL, like when that first existed. I'd actually casted the development teams who were going into the LPL. Those don't have any views. This was before LPL English existed, and my God, was I awful. I was actually so bad at being able to, like, as a color caster, being able to explain my points. And I had a tri-cast with like 2 other people who, just starting out as commentators. So please don't look for them. That's my request.
But you talked about that. One of your favorite things, I think it was specific with the LPL, is that you were able to, whenever you did matches with challenger or up-and-coming players, because it was just a new story for you. Is that right?
Yeah. Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. So it sounded like some of the favorite matches for you to cast were ones that were about up-and-coming players
yes.
and kind of developing their stories.
Very true. I remember when I first got into LPL, I actually got in by watching the LSPL, the secondary league, with players who were up and coming, like either just coming into the scene or had been in there for a little bit and had been developing. I really enjoyed that because it created depth for the scene. Not only like you truly understood the scene as a whole when you understood like the competition behind it. That if players were performing poorly on the main league, that you knew exactly who was there behind them, just nipping at their heels. I enjoyed that a lot. And it made it so much easier when there were splits happening, like when I was commentating, actually 2019 and 2018, like those 2 years where new players were coming in, like so many new players. And I already had the book and chapters of their story in the LSPL and LDL. So I felt like that was a huge advantage for me, and it made it exciting. There were so many of them.
Cool. So we're going to start off with a lot of personal questions. We're going to go into then your career step by step. But for the personal questions, who is Dr. Badeso Gaba?
Oh, no.
Where is he from?
Oh, okay. So actually, funny enough, even though that was a joke video, Bariso is a family friend, actually, like a family friend of mine growing up. And Gaba is just my actual family last name. So if you wanted to call me Barento Gaba instead of Barento Mohammad, you would be accurate as well. That would be a correct thing to say.
Good. Favorite Bill Withers song?
Oh, Lean On Me. For sure, Lean On Me. I love that track. It was always on a commercial growing up for one of the mustard seeds, like in my city. And I just always loved it because it exemplified a lot of things that I really enjoyed.
Why are Italian restaurants the greatest?
You got it. It's just there's no Italian food that tastes poorly. Just a fact. Just a factual statement. I'd like to be challenged on that.
So you have a lot of eccentric and beautiful T-shirts. So what is the process, your thought process in choosing a T-shirt other than just walking down random streets?
First of all, I always just got to walk down random streets. That's where the most beautiful things happen. You either find something that you didn't know existed, like a shop, or in this case, shirts, or you're just self-reflecting and you just find something about yourself. So that's one thing about the shirts. I mean, first of all, floral. I love colors and I love those patterns. If I find them, I'm getting it, no matter what. And then walking down the street is important because I'm actually really bad with online shopping. No matter what, I'm getting the wrong size. It's guaranteed. and I cannot actually send them back. And yeah, I just that's a lot of effort. So walking down the street is basically the best way for me to get something new.
Well, doing it in China is pretty much the best straight to the source, so that's pretty good.
Exactly.
So what was your takeaway with reading the Little Prince's book?
That was a while back. Oh my God. For me, that was exploring. For me, the one thing I've always wanted to do growing up was traveling and kind of finding out, like, a thirst for knowledge, finding out a perspective that I didn't know exists, right? Growing up, when I was 20 years old, I had...
Oh, wait. So Stream can hear me. Stream will be right back. We're fixing an audio problem that keeps happening. Yep, okay, you're joined. Great. Okay,
there we go.
Sorry. So you were 20 years old.
Yeah, at 20 years old, I'd realized that I actually had not left my city. Like, I haven't left Calgary at all, and I was that old. My family my father would always say, "Oh, you know what? This summer we're going to be going to Banff, or, like, you know, just literally a city right over." But I had never done that. Every time it would be a free time for me. I just never had the money or time, I guess, interest to leave the city. And throughout the entire time, I was like, please, can I please leave the city or country or do something? And I had gotten to a point. Do you remember the Jim Carrey movie? I forget the name of it, but he had been stuck in one location for so long, and he found out all of it was just a movie set. I know people out there would...
Truman Show.
Yes, Truman Show. At some point, I was starting to believe I was in it, because I was like, is this guy fake? He's like, actually. So to answer your question initially, I was like, I just had a thirst for exploration, to be able to travel, see new people, see new places, and new points of view. And I felt like I was actually able to get that when I started commentary and coaching.
I think that's interesting, which ties into your approach to coaching, which is kind of getting other people's perspectives. So, so keeping with the books, so what are there any books recently that you've read that kind of have helped you get a new or unique perspective on things?
Actually, there's a book that I was reading called Leadership. So that's one thing that I wanted to kind of dig into was American leaders primarily, and kind of seeing how in tough times ended up how they led their people in tough trials, right? Now, that was actually quite some time ago, and I think I still need to get back into that novel and, like, finishing it up. So I would say that it's a TBD on what I was able to get out of it, but the goal is still pretty much there. That for me, I always think that there are ways to improve leadership. Confidence is obviously key to that, but direction is the most important. And so for me, like, that's one big takeaway that I want to get out of that novel.
We'll get into that in more detail later on. So,
yeah.
What's not valid and what's valid criticism people are throwing at you now?
I realize that I don't get as much criticism since I've taken a step back from the public eye. But I would say valid what's not? This is kind of weird because I'm always the person that thinks that every criticism is valid. Because even if it's not explored criticisms, like criticism that they've put in time and effort into, the criticism comes from somewhere, even if it's just a feeling. Like when I was in commentary, people would generally throw out criticism if they're a fan of one team, that you're being, this is what people would say is not valid, that you're biased, right? And so whenever I hear the whole bias criticism, I'm like, okay, interesting. I mean, I will take that criticism for what it is, because, like, I will absorb it and I will judge if it's incorrect or if it's something that I can if it's actionable. Half the time it's not actionable, and it's like, okay, it's just what the fan believes, and I'm okay with that. I will take that feedback and I won't do much about it, but I love the fact that they're passionate about it. And that's just how I think about these things. So I guess it's more about perspective. I think all criticism is something that I love to hear, but whether or not I'm going to do something about it, that's up to me and my priorities. So I feel like that was a weird answer, but that's something that I always that's what I believe in intrinsically.
So those are random fans, but so what about do you have a personal network of people in which that you seek feedback from, and what kind of feedback do they give?
Yes. Right now, when I'm coaching, for sure, it's my direct peers. So Inaro, who's head coach right now, the main team, because I think he's been working as a coach for quite some time, and he has a strict way of how he sees the game being played, and also has a really good feedback system within the team. So there's a lot I can take away from that, just either having conversation or just viewing how he plays, or at least how he operates on the team. So like that's the easiest one. Management around me. So like I think that I'm actually really grateful to be with the Golden Guardians, because there's so much that I can take from a coaching perspective. There's also just a lot of coaches in academy that are open and communicative. So like that one is, I think, really just nice to be able to like a system to work with. When I was in commentary, it was immediate peers. When I was in LPL, I spoke to people like Frostgear, Rusty, like all the people that I had worked with at that time. And then when I was going out for international competitions, for sure, I was communicating with the casters in North America and Europe. So always the peers who you are trying to match or like in the long term get better than is always who I work with the closest.
How was working with Frost?
Very damn good. I love Frost, man. Frost is someone who puts an inhuman amount of effort in whatever she's trying to accomplish. So like my first criticism of Frost whenever I work with her is like, you're working too damn hard. Just sleep, please, right? And it's always, I guess, good criticism that someone is being told to work less. But it's always that attitude and passion that I loved about her. So it always pushes you to drive anytime you come to work. That was my first, idea of when I was working with her. And also she's just great to hang out with.
So you did a show with Thorne. What was that experience like?
It was good. It's always like, I guess Thorne is incredibly experienced in esports, or at least like he has a billion shows. He just never stops. And so working with a host with that much experience, I've realized how easy it is. And I actually got much better at hosting, even though that's not my career choice when I was working at LPL, because at that time we were actually losing a lot of people. So I didn't have there were times where we had like millions of games. I was like, okay, we need a host for this day, or a caster or something, play-by-play. I was like, I could do this because I had studied and worked with people who had asked amazing questions and all that. So, and I also hosted a pre-show for the LPL. So to answer that question, really damn good. It's nice that I had that experience of working with someone like that.
Cool. And then, so we talked about this off camera, but you spent some time with SelfReflection after the split. What did you self-reflect on? What did you discover about yourself?
So I challenge other people to have like short, midterm, and long-term goals, like written, documented, just so it's easier to track. Like going through a week or going through a split, it's actually really difficult if you can't track the accomplishments that you've made, right? Or at least what your intention was. For me, I think that structure that I came in with was something that I felt like I did good work at and like trying to instill. But I think being a hard ass is something that I realized I can always improve on, right? I'm naturally a nice person, and that's good. Like I'm naturally a reasonable person, and that's positive. But there are times for that. And I think that was one thing I realized, that there is always a time to put your foot down. When I was a caster lead in the LPL, I always go back to that because that's the most recent experience that I had in 2019. I was actually, as I said, I was a caster lead. And I had a lot of experience, the most experience in the team at the moment. And I was pretty heavy-handed. And I've realized that experience and knowledge allowed me to be much more harsher with the people around me because I was fully confident in what I was laying out. And so I can understand first split back, being lenient, or at least kind of being open is fine. But that self-reflection allowed me to kind of like, okay, this is where I should be a lot more harsher, or this is when I should be layering concepts. And so like those are the two things that I think were my biggest takeaways from that split.
So you talked about that of when you go into a team, you kind of almost assimilate or you ingest of what that person's perspective is, how they work. So then for your point of being strict versus kind of, hearing them out and trying their ideas, at what point do you kind of turn on the strict of like, we're going this way versus more of the open of like, yeah, let's try it. Even if, well, because I think you already answered it, which is if you are knowledgeable enough in order to be able to make the confident decision, you will. But even if you're confident in making that decision, will you allow people to explore something even though you know it's wrong?
No. And I think it comes down to the initial conversation, right? The first conversation is always the most important one. What is your goal? Team goal. First of all, how do you view the game? And there are always going to be differences amongst the team of the specifics on like how a game should be played, or how you should approach a situation. That conversation should happen. And the conversation is necessary because, like, especially with League of Legends, like the game changes every year in a very massive way. So it challenges your priorities. And you shouldn't be afraid to be wrong, because let's just say if a team has priority over Dragons over Rift Herald, like that's always a conversation that comes up. And it's always the immediate versus the long term. Long term is the dragon stacking versus the immediate, which is just the amount of gold that you get from Rift Herald, right? And that's the specifics, but those are the type of conversations that you have every day. And then the team has to be able to take, or at least like players on the team have to be able to concede points when they realize that at the end of the day, there are multiple ways to play out a situation. You just have to agree on the one major point, and that's the benefit of a team. So I would say once you've concluded your discussion and you made a core decision on how we should play, there are no ways to experiment from that, or at least like move away from that goal. You should always be playing to that goal until you realize that, we need to make adaptations because we're being screwed by it.
So getting in the esports, you used writing to get in. What is your writing process, and why did you use writing to get into esports?
Initially it was, as a hobby. When I first kind of stepped into esports, it was because I had worked in a political science / computer science mix when I was in university. So writing is something that I found was artistically challenging, and also challenged my structure and viewpoint of the game. So if I'm writing about how a team plays and operates, I have to structure, first of all, what's the most important thing? What's the overarching thing that this team does really well at? What are the specifics, the details of like what makes that action great? And then the concluding argument. And I felt like that structure really helped me from writing. It helped me communicate to other people about like why they should be valuing something. So I always say for some people, if they have issues in structure in their day-to-day, write. Like you should write something. Like write a diary, a journal. You can already tell that I enjoy like the written language, just because in all sense, when it comes to structure, the day-to-day structure, written is always beneficial, because you can always look back and say, oh, this is what I've improved at, or this is how bad I was back then.
I try not to look back at any of my old writings. I used to, but bad idea.
It feels bad.
Yeah.
It feels bad to look back at it.
Yeah. I really had those thoughts. Really?
Yeah.
So as an analyst, what you talked about openness to learning and time, meaning that you need time to be able to get better, but also being open as an analyst, not just I'm the expert. Yeah, how do you build a great analyst?
It kind of goes back to time. You have to put in a lot of effort. If you want to be a great analyst, there are multiple ways to get in, either being a professional player and that time being expended on being good yourself and understanding how to perform in laning phase or whatever that'll get you to that position. Or if you're, outside of that realm, putting in as much time as you possibly can to watch the game, dissect the game. For me, it was, there just became a joke from my colleagues or people who had just literally just watched my Twitter timeline and realizing that I've watched, basically if there's a game on, I'm watching it. If it's happening in China, I'm watching that. Korea, I'm watching that. Brazil, I'm watching that, just to get ideas from how they've been playing certain comps. And even if it's like on a champion select level, or if it's a level, how people are playing level ones, how people are warding, there are so many ways to play the game. It's a benefit and it's a negative, because the negative of that is that you get lost in the sauce, that you don't really have a specific thing that you're working on. That's why the structure is important. So you can break the game down in all these different subsections, and you can really level up. So, what makes a good analyst? First, you need the time to pool into it, and then you can start working at it.
So what did you learn? Well, you were an analyst, but then you turned into a coach at Dignitas. What did you learn at your time with Dignitas as a coach?
Team building and kind of, working with people was the biggest one. Because before going into Dignitas, I had worked offline. No, online. I'd worked online with Chiefs Esports Club, an Australian team. I'd worked with Dignitas Europe, EU, that turned into Splice, that is right now, I guess, Mad Lions. But like, I'd worked with them online as a assistant coach on that one as well, head analyst, assistant coach, and like all of that was great. But then when you finally start working with people face to face in house, all of that has new experiences of going back to the earlier point, leadership and communicating and like basically getting everyone on the same page, working together in rough times. Like all of those things I'd realized was just a flood of challenges. So that was all of the things that I'd learned. It's fine. It kind of feels like I'm kind of retouching on those same things this split after I think 4 or 5 years. Yeah, 4 years of going into commentary in between coaching back in Dignitas and coaching right now in Golden Guardians.
So you've worked in Oceania, LPL, NA, EU. Is there any team that is taking the amalgamation of the best lessons learned from every different region?
You say that again.
Sorry.
What, like a team right now?
Are there any teams that you see doing what you're doing to the best ability, which is watching Brazil and Oceania and LPL and every different region and pulling from the best from each region?
I would say G2 is probably the best example of that. It was like the most recent example of a team that, a Western team that had picked up, sure, a lot of the best players, but also were just super experimental. Like they were willing to play anything in their given positions. They forced mages into the bottom lane, and sure, that was because Perks moved to the AD carry at that time. I know that they have caps now, but at that time, moving Perks to bottom lane and challenging ADs to play all these different mages, but also just pushing the speed of the game, because in Korea, people a lot of the times pull information from and kind of slow the game down, make as less mistakes as possible, and really have it a far more control style, where China was a lot more aggressive, took a lot more fights earlier on. And it's not as if they didn't understand the step-by-step process of getting to like a Rift Herald play or something, but they would see the benefit of, okay, what about in step 2 when they challenge us to ward, we just fight them there. Like we just take the fight if it's advantageous, because we have faith in our mechanics. G2 is a team that took that and I think ran with that. So there was the level of experimenting, having fun with the game, and fighting more frequently and taking advantage of the meta that I think was a good example of someone who took a lot from other regions.
Other than construction going on at 3 a.m., what's your favorite part about China?
Oh my God. Yeah, I didn't enjoy that. I loved the one thing that I was looking for in seeing different perspective and meeting people. I got that in China. And the challenges of learning a different language and like living alone, and I got that in China. And it felt like I was very humbled in a lot of the challenges that I faced, because it reminded me of a lot of people when you're living in Canada or America who are learning like English as a third language, fourth language, like second language. And I was like, wow, I understood that on such a huge level. When I was communicating with someone in Chinese, I was like, wow, I really seem like an idiot. It's like, I really hope that they don't think I'm intellectually challenged because I can't communicate on the same level that they can. And you take that for granted, I think, a lot of the times, and being able to communicate the thoughts that you have. And also just like different foods and taking a leap of faith. I've met so many amazing people in China that I kind of really loved it from that perspective. And also another thing too is because I grew up in a very political family. Like they were very heavily like, there's always a discussion about what was happening in Africa, America, the Middle East, and all of that. And also, so like CNN was always on, like American news networks were always on. And if you were living in the West, you always get negative news or like about China in general. You never get to see the positives of what happening from like a very community, like people level. So getting to live in China, actually, you get to see that quite a bit.
Thoughts on Wang Sasong?
Oh my God. Wang, the IG owner, correct?
Yeah.
My memory is so bad. That guy living his best life. The guy could literally do whatever he wants. Imagine just owning a team and saying, I am now playing a game of League of Legends on the stage, and there's nothing you guys can do about it. There's a lot of jealousy and just like a mixed emotions that I have on a day-to-day whenever Wang just is something that I'm watching or is just a new article of whatever the hell he's doing. Crazy guy.
Fun times. Why did you move from coaching to casting back to coaching?
When I moved from coaching to commentary, it was because I'm always someone, once again, I'm very open to new challenges. I was open to continue on with coaching, but when I had the opportunity to commentate, that was one thing that I always wanted to kind of get back into. Because also on a very core level, commentary, you can get a lot of skills out of that. A lot of skills, and you can move into a lot of directions. I can always go back into coaching. I could even do that at the same times if I wanted to. And I felt as though it could really challenge me in a core level of communicating. I was a bad communicator, and if you strengthen your ability to communicate, then that really helps you in a lot of personal levels, including coaching. That being said, when I moved back into coaching, I had already wanted to find time to coach when I was commentating, but the problem with the LPL is that you have about 6 days of LPL games a week, and they were planning to do 7. And I was like, I'm not going to have any time, aren't I? So I had an opportunity when I decided to move away from it to go back into coaching, and I thought that was a good challenge. I was actually completely open to having a gap year. Kind of figuring things out. But because when I decided that I wasn't interested in the LPL, it was pretty late actually in off season. So I was like, I'm not going to get an offer. That's not going to happen. But then I had found a damn good one with Golden Guardian. So I took that.
So one of the coolest things you got to do while you're there was culture shock. Do you have any favorite moments from that series?
When I went to Chengdu, because Chengdu, it's known as a paradise city. Like, it's a very relaxing city. There's a mix between kind of new age shopping districts, and it's on the same damn district that you get like old ancient temples. I really enjoyed having to visit that. But the best part of it was, what is it called again? It was like a new park. It was People's Park, I think it was what it was called. And if you can go into the park, a lot of older people that was just sitting there like drinking tea and talking to each other. So you can sit down, have tea, and there was literally, you have an option. And I had this opportunity for them to just clear your ears, just to clean your ears out. I know. I was like, first of all, invasive. And they were like, no, you got to do it. It's amazing. I was like, okay. The process is not amazing. Because they put in like metal drills in there, and you're like, oh my God, am I going to be able to hear after this? It was wild. And I had to literally do a leap of faith because the people around me were saying, don't worry about it. This is amazing. Believe me, trust me. Went through it. And then right after, like they take the drills out and like everything, was the process was done. I heard, my ears were like brand new. I could hear things. I swear to God. Okay, maybe it might be a hyperbole saying from miles away, but it felt amazing.
Really?
So that was an incredible experience, being able to go to this park, like have tea, get my ears cleaned, and then it be as effective as it was. So I loved that it was a small part of the entire journey. It would probably be a more human response to say that I just love eating the hot pot that was there, because like Chengdu is also known for their spicy hot pot, like really spicy hot pot. It was a damn good trip. I love Culture Shock so much because it got me that opportunity to travel around China.
That's the best gig ever. It's like, hey, go travel around, eat cool food, visit cool things, have a drill in your ear. Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds like a good gig.
Yeah, I'll do
The
it.
bad part was there'd be times that they'll try and chick you though. Like there were 2 times, and I went to Beijing. Actually, both those times were in Beijing. They're like, "Oh, have this," and it'd be like a gray soup, and I'm like, "What am I looking at?" Oh, don't even worry about it. It's just it's an ancient. What people take when they get sick. I was like, "All right, I'll try it." And they were just tricking me because they knew it would taste awful. And I was like, yeah, this is how people deal with upset stomachs. And I'm like, well, we're not doing that again. I appreciate it. I'll go back to eating the good food again.
So all in all, how would you describe your 4-year tenure in LPL China?
Amazing. Beautiful. It was 2 years, I believe, in China and then 2 years in Australia. But the 2 years in China that I had, I felt like I grew so much as a person. Because like the idea of even just living alone in a foreign country, regardless of what country it is, and once again, like that hit a lot for me in terms of self-reflection, challenging of what I wanted to do, a lot of the goals that I had when I was on the team. I remember I came onto the team in the LPL as kind of an upstart, like a rookie, and everyone else was so experienced and was so good at their craft. And then I ended that team being a lead of that craft and being a leader on that team. And a lot of that process, I felt like I really grew in an office environment, in a leadership environment. So I felt like in terms of that, it gave me so much confidence and it gave me so much, it gave me so many lessons in a lot of things of that realm. And then from a personal level, I mean, I just felt like I grew so much as a human. And I didn't get any of that like I said, when I first 20 years in Calgary, the hell, no progress. And in my culture, a lot of this is a fun one. In my Oromo culture, you're not expected to leave the family until you get married.
Wow.
And even then, exactly, like you're living with the family for a long time. And even then, you're gonna be like, when you get a wife or like someone close by, you're pretty much super close to the family structure, and you're not expected to like leave the city, as an example. It's kind of crazy. And so me making that move was a huge leap that my parents weren't exactly happy with. But it was something that I felt really grateful for, that I was able to do that.
So what did you learn from China LPL that you brought now to NA with Golden Guardians?
I think the easiest answer is the willingness to try, the willingness to fight, the willingness to trust in your own mechanics, I think. Because if we're just talking about a lot of the benefits of what made the LPL teams champions consistently internationally, because the same criticisms for teams like Invictus Gaming and FPX were there. There are always criticisms about them as an objective team, right? They're always a team that are slower to taking the larger objectives. They're not playing the map optimally, but there are players who are just so damn good individually. And a lot of that comes to them challenging themselves in solo queue, challenging themselves in scrims, and making the best out of their time on that. And then working together in team fights. Unity is something that is consistent when it comes to the best teams, like the top 3 teams in the LPL's team fighting, that you can always examine and then use to your team. I will say though, this split, whenever I'm introducing a concept or trying to work on something with a team, a lot of the times I do not take from the LPL because the LPL teams are usually teams that shirk away from the setup and from the concept. So a lot of times the best lessons are how you team fight and just kind of like especially how you lane. Those are usually the best things that you can take away from the LPL.
You've said that LPL plays as a team to a fault. So how would you describe NA?
Very slow. I feel like those interviews kind of from like Jizuke and from some of the players that are imported can say the same thing. There'll be times where mid jungle have a huge lead and the game's still going on, stagnating for 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes. I mean, when you can always be pushing more aggressive advantages, even if there's a risk involved in it. And that's what I love about C9, because C9 smashed that. they have such fast game times because when they have an advantage, and they usually have earlier game compositions, they take laning phase pretty seriously from mid and bot lane. And they use those advantages, and there's never really a waste in movement. And I think some of the benefits, I don't know, I couldn't say if they're taking that from China, but I know for certain that's what Invictus Gaming, FPX, all of the LPL teams do. It's like, that is something that should be pushed for.
How much is LPL's success due to the imports from Korea, and how much of it is it from China?
I think it's about like, I would say it's about 60-40, 60 in terms of imports. Because I remember before the import happened, like importing happened around 2015, 2014, that a lot of the solo lanes were pretty bad, or at least they weren't at top tier level internationally. Our top laners specifically were pretty bad. And so when Acorn came into the top lane for LGD, when Rookie came in for Invictus Gaming, Doinby wasn't a high tier name. Like, he came in from Korea, sure, but he started his career in the LSPL, in the secondary league in China. Like, these imports, I think, pushed competition within the region pretty heavily. That was number one. But the reason why I said, like, the second point about, like, 40% domestically, like Chinese players, is because the attitude of how you play the game persisted. It was the Korean talent that came in, like Easy Hoon, that didn't thrive. They actually failed because they were players that came in wanting to slow the pace of the game down and failed at doing so. Like, it was the more mechanically gifted, the stronger Chinese players that came in and still, like, thrashed him. And basically it was, hey, you get better at this, or you change your style to fit how your team operated and how the league operates, or you will be left in the dust. A good example of this is actually Karsa. Even though Karsa came in from the LMS, he was a player that actually his first split was bad. Like, he didn't perform well in his first time in, and a lot of the times it was because he was saying the same things of like the game is moving quickly, and I have to change the way I play to make an impact. So that was one thing. And another thing is not even just so much the players. The Korean coaching staff that came in definitely made a huge boost to the infrastructure. In 2014, coaching was laughable in China. It's like basically didn't exist. And so a lot of the idea of, like, mindless team fighting or mindlessly playing the game was actually true in 2014. That was hindering a lot of the LPL teams from performing. But RNG, Invictus Gaming, specifically EDG, for sure EDG, were teams that had strong coaching staffs. Aaron was Chinese from EDG, and I think, like, he was a great exception to that. But RNG and IG were good examples of teams that took in strong Korean coaching staffs, and it definitely improved the region. Because while there's a lot that the world can learn from China and how to team fight and play the game a lot more skirmishy, there was so much that China could learn from the rest of the regions by just understanding concepts and playing to those team concepts, so they didn't always fall behind in vision control.
So with LPL regionalization, it's pretty cool. What works really well with LPL regionalization, and what could be better?
Oh, you mean like the franchise system, right?
Yeah. Well, also that they all have their individual stadiums.
That's true. That's true. So I think the best things about that is there's such a thirst for esports in China that by the way, this goes back to the culture shock thing too. I completely undersold how popular it would be. Like, I didn't think it was going to be popular in OMG's stadium in Chengdu, for example, because OMG at that time, they're a little better now, but they were like the worst team in the LPL. They were a really weak team, and they were being put, like, their stadium was put in Chengdu. I was like, okay, well, that's going to be a pretty small, like, fan base, right? Wrong. Like, they were selling out their venue. Yes. When I went there in Chengdu initially, I got to see their grand opening, and even though they lost, expectedly, like, they not only filled out the venue, but they had so many passionate OMG fans with merchandise, like jerseys and jackets. I was like, wow, That's crazy. And it didn't stop from just the grand opening. It still continued. And RNG was, I mean, I expected them to sell out, but the fact that they were able to sell out months in advance, like it was so hard for people in Beijing to get tickets. I was getting messages from Chinese fans like, how do I get a ticket? I can't even get a ticket to RNG versus like the worst team. It was just literally always sold out while away. So that one got me off guard, I think. So that one's a really big benefit, is that you get to see the whole country get involved in esports, and it's not like just the finals where you get a chance to watch the games up live. And that really helped. I think the negative of it, of course, is like from production and player standpoint, it's like there's a lot of traveling. That's just a lot that they have to deal with. And that was always something that I've heard about, but the players are like, oh my, if you're a player and you don't have a specific city that you're tied to, then you're going around. You're just flying around China. And the casters, hilarious. I was communicating to the Chinese casters, and it's gotten much better now that they have a studio that they work out of. But I'd be like, talking to them, I was like, yeah, I just came back from Beijing. I'm flying to Chengdu tomorrow, and someone get me away from airports.
Nice. So now moving into GG. First off, how does community energy towards a player or team affect a game's outcome?
I don't think it affects it. I think maybe in the long term, I would imagine that it would start grinding at a player. It really depends on the player's mentality. So if like a community is constantly critiquing a player's individual skill or whatever it may be, right? Because the community can come fast and harsh. It's really a challenge on the player, the system around them, coaching staff, and everything. So make it so, first of all, if you're hearing feedback and criticism, that you're trusting your inner circle first and foremost. That you're taking it from your inner circle rather than the community. Because it's just much easier for you to get real, consistent feedback that's deliverable, right? And also, like in terms of mental health, it doesn't make sense for a lot of people to be looking back at the negativity consistently. And maybe in time that will change the way you play. And that's always my fear, is that people do that. So I think that will happen in time. If there's a player playing in a system that's not strong internally, and so it can erode the way they play.
Okay, so a strong system, a strong coaching staff, strong team.
Yes.
Okay.
And it shouldn't be a problem. But yeah, people will always care a lot about how they're viewed, how their public image is viewed.
When it comes to team's narrative, how much impact does a caster have on a team's narrative?
A lot of impact. Because they're the voice to the community. The community, if people will oftentimes forget, is full of lower elo player, right? Players who are either casual, or if they're playing a lot, is probably in platinum, maybe diamond. And I would say that even diamond players don't understand a team game to the same depth, especially, of course, the same depth of the teams themselves. Like, not even close, right? Diamond player will not understand why a team is drafting the way they do, or playing the map the way they do. So those players will be listening to the casters first and foremost. Critical thinking, a lot of the times for diamond players, will always be there. So if a caster just says something is bad, some people who are listening, the viewers, will listen and say, is that really bad though? But the majority of those players will either echo the sentiments from the casters, or just flat out believe them, right? So casters will have a pretty large impact. I will say this though, the co-streams that are currently happening, I think are a really positive change to that. Because I think people should just be listening from different perspectives anyways. There will always be different perspectives of the game, so I think that having those challenging views will force people to be a lot more critical thinking about the game.
So what is the perspective of the public's view of GG's narrative? And what is the public's view of GG's narrative? And what would you like the GG narrative to be?
So the GG narrative right now has been that, first and foremost, that we were a 10th place team. Like, I'm just talking about the main team primarily. That we were a 10th place team, that we were just worst individually across the board. will probably suffer as a team as well. It was just it was negative across the board, and I think it wasn't even. And my problem with it was that there was no specifics of why people thought that we were going to be bad, other than the fact that they were like, "Oh, we're just bad players across the board." And one thing that I thought didn't update itself was like as the split went on and we were taking wins versus Team Liquid, I think IMT, like we were taking a few good wins and we were getting better as the split went on, but the narrative didn't change. Like the idea of development really doesn't exist in the minds of the viewers, and I think wasn't really pushed from like the broadcast as well. So I would like that to 100% be pushed. It's easy to force that, by the way, when the team makes playoffs, right? like the idea of, oh, they were a 10th place team, but actually we made playoffs anyway. So what happened there? Then that forces a conversation, but I would love to hear more about why people think that we had got better and talk about the specifics. Other than, oh, closer is just better individually. Yeah, sure. But also Grayson performed well, like incredibly well as well. Like all of the players stepped up, sure, but it's not as easy as that. Like our mid game was so much better than some like the teams that we had fought going into the playoffs. We were just by far better than teams like IMT and Dignitas. So instead of individually, like how were we better as a team? What concepts? Like I know those are very specific, but I always think that something like that, even if in a simplified way, just so the fans would notice that, I think helps.
You've talked about giving feedback and specifically examples, and you've called it a umbilical cord that you need to cut off. Have you been more concise with your feedback and examples with the GG team?
Hell yeah. Yes. And preparing always helps. There'll be times where, the feedback is immediately after a game or immediately after like the play that happens, right? And so that'll be a conversation naturally, but my feedback is much cleaner now than it was back then.
You've talked about it taking a long time for some situations for you to kind of integrate with the team. How have you been able to integrate quickly with this team?
With the players that we have, very quick. Everybody is already has a lot of experience underneath them and are very critical themselves. So those conversations are easier to have. You can be straight to the point and honest with them. So very quick, surprisingly so. Thought it would take a lot longer.
So when it comes to in-game comms, how do you foster team-wide conversation instead of just a single shot caller?
Ooh, kind of depends on the problems with the teams. I enjoy the single shot caller when you feel as though there are, like if there are many different communicators, like the way people see the game. In fact, actually Double Lift kind of talked about this a little in public about the idea of a democracy in shot calling and having just one direct caller. A direct caller makes it so people always know what objective is on the map and what they're playing for. The problem with that is that caller will not have insight on what the top laner situation is. And so that's where all of those people need to be funneling information. I think that's a really strong system. Democracy is when everybody knows their role. That's kind of like the goal. Everybody already knows their role. Everybody knows what they're going to be doing on the map. And all of the information is there and being given to. And I think that's ultimately the goal, is to say, one person doesn't need to say, this is what we're doing. Everybody already knows what they're doing. So I would say that having one direct caller is a good way to start, and then moving towards a democracy.
So if you're going to run, let's say, drills to be better with mechanics or whatever, are there drills that you can run for communication?
I would say the best thing is giving people specific roles. Coming into a game, letting them know what they have to be stating, what information need to be given. So best example is for mid lane and top lane. When the map opens up, like around 15 minutes into the game, they need to be communicating to themselves what lane they need to be on, like what side lane they're working off of, and it helps their jungler as well. That's something that the jungler needs to be listening to, but doesn't need to tell them what to do. And then after the game is done, and they'll look back at that specifically in individual reviews, say, hey, did we give the right information? And I'll give them I will be listening to their comms and giving them feedback of this is what you need to be saying at this time. and give them time marks. So in terms of drills, it's always they need to go into the game knowing exactly what they want to communicate, or at least what they need to be communicating. And then if it's efficient or inefficient, they'll be let known afterwards.
Golden Grains does a good job of giving constructive feedback, usually in all sorts of different parts of the company. But for you specifically, with your team, what did you go into the split working on and with your goals? And what did you achieve and how did you achieve it?
Talking about more individually with me or with the team?
With the team.
Okay. For us, it was more around playing towards, first of all, always knowing what objective we're playing towards. Thing about Academy is a lot of the players have different places that they're in their career, right? For instance, a good example is Gorica is a rookie, first split in competitive in general. And so for him, he's kind of learning the ropes. So he's starting from step one, where you'll be having players like Huhi, who was with us initially, Tony, aka Hard, who's our jungler who's been in the scene for a while. It's a mix of having players that are literally just starting out and have been there for a while, right? So first things first, working with people individually and knowing that they're all in different starting points and blocks, right? So they know what they need to be working on to get better individually. But then as a team, what objective are we playing towards? Being far more disciplined so we don't make any missteps and that we're always learning something in games. Communication is always something that I think is the main goal every game, is to communicate effectively, coherently, and being a part of the play. That's always relevant. There will be games or there'll be times within the split that you're working on a specific comp that either caters to team fighting or caters to split pushing, and they require completely different skills, right? One is going to be hey, mid laner, you need to be communicating far more because you have an assassin champion like a Kiana, and you're going to be needing to communicate when you're on side lane pushing and when you see an angle to fight. Versus when you're having a jungler playing Olaf, and he's the one that needs to be the main communicator. So it can shift per person, but everybody needs to be listening and being a part of the play. So it can be difficult, but comms and knowing what objective they're fighting for is the most important thing.
We're going to get into one final set of questions that's kind of like a rapid fire. But are there any topics that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about?
Man, you went through a lot. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
You touched it all, it feels like.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you. I was curious. Okay.
Yeah,
all right,
you
then we're good.
Pretty much got them all.
Cool. Actually, no, I don't. In the very first question, I didn't actually ask you. Where did Razleplasm come from?
Oh, true. When I first started out in just playing games, MMOs and League, honestly, my initial username was Phoenix Rider. I actually got it from a Harry Potter book, Order of the Phoenix, that cover. Boom, loved it, used it. First of all, the problem is it's too long. It's too long. Some games or websites like forums will just reject you because that's just a way too long of a word or a name. So I needed to find something that was shorter and something unique because Phoenix Rider, oddly enough, was taken multiple times. And I'm not going to be Phoenix Rider 555 or something like that, right? So I've actually jumped from name to name to name. I stuck with Razleplasm because I needed to find a unique name. I was in my room, and Raz, because it was Razzle, Razzle Dazzle, and I thought that hit my personality very well, and I enjoyed it. Then Plasm, my God. I was in my room, and on my TV screen, this is a while back, was an episode of Danny Phantom. And I was like, Plasm, a ghost show, makes sense. I thought it was the most hilarious and the dumbest name humanly possible. And I couldn't stop laughing for about 15 minutes or something. And I was like, I'm sticking with Razleplasm. And I fully expected that I was going to go on to another name because I do that a lot. But it stuck with me for some time. So that was just who I was.
Cool. All right. Here we go. This is from Inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton. What is your favorite word?
The one that's... Oh, no. Favorite word? Confidence.
Least favorite word?
Oh, no. I'll just go with the easiest one. Moist. Never say it. Ever.
Speaking of moist, what turns you on?
Intelligence. I want to have an intellectual conversation with somebody on any subject, and really that just means someone who's critical thinking. Like they don't have to know the most about the subject, but knowing if they're incorrect or that's about it, really.
So pretty much you're most turned on right now than you ever have been. Got it. What turns you off?
Pretty much the exact opposite of what I just mentioned. So someone who is just stubborn for absolutely no reason, will not move on a subject, and like has no ambition.
What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, good quick question is people talking. There'll be times where I'm just literally, in Australia I did this a lot. Morning, go out, walk into a cafe, and just be in that environment because I just enjoy that kind of feel of just seeing people communicating a lot. So that's just one thing I love.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Munching, chewing, hate it, despise it.
What is your favorite curse word?
Oh, you're gonna love this, by the way. Because I said it so often. I said it a few times when I was commentating because I got it from one individual. Hasiktir. Yep. I just said it. No one understood it. One Turkish fan realized it, and he was like, "What are you saying?" And I just got it because people in my family said it too because we watched the TYT shows.
I saw in your YouTube you had a bunch of like clips from like who said that? Who said that? Yeah. Like the excited senator and yeah, it was good stuff.
Yes, good stuff.
That's crazy. Interesting times. We'll talk about that off camera. So, what profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
Actually, radio, or even as a sports commentator, because I love basketball, and also eventually politics. So I feel as though the next step for me, if esports, for 5 or 10 years down the line doesn't work out for me, I think working as a radio host or going into basketball commentary, all of these things is something that I enjoy, kind of dabble with.
What profession would you not like to do?
Oh, I don't know, man. That's a tough one by me. Anything that is boring. I know it's a obvious this kind of statement word, but if I'm not passionate about it, I will not touch it.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
What's up, brother? And I'm like, oh, I was expected.
And on that note, Raz, Barento, thank you so much for making the time.
Sweet. Thanks for having me, man. Always love it.
All right. Bye.
See ya, man.